There's a silent strength in the woman who walks into a room and carries peace like armor. Not because life has been kind, not because her world is perfect, but because she's learned a powerful truth. You don't always have control over what happens to you, but you always have control over how you show up in response. Acting as if nothing bothers you doesn't mean you don't feel deeply. It means you've decided not to hand your power to things or people that don't deserve it. This isn't about pretending. It's about evolving. And today, I want to show you exactly how. There is a deep and often unspoken suffering that comes from being emotionally available to everything. The subtle toll it takes on your nervous system, the way your identity gets chipped away by your own reactions, until you no longer recognize whether you are responding from truth or from habit. The tragedy of that is profound. When your emotions are governed by the environment, by every passing word, by every shifting glance, you become, effectively, a leaf in the wind. You lose the core of yourself, and in its place, you begin to orbit other people's chaos. You become exhausted not just by life, but by your lack of rootedness in who you are. This is not merely about being overly emotional. It is about the existential burden of living without sovereignty. To act as if nothing bothers you is not to delude yourself into believing that nothing does. It is to construct a space inside yourself that cannot be easily invaded. A space where you remain centered, even when everything outside is fragmented. It is a discipline, a mental and emotional structure that must be built over time, with deliberate effort and deep commitment to growth. Because the alternative is a lifetime of being swayed by forces you cannot control. A lifetime of emotional slavery. You see, people often confuse calmness with weakness or disengagement or apathy. But the truth is that to remain composed in a world that profits off your reactivity is a radical act. It is a declaration that you have chosen ownership over victimhood, that you refuse to hand your internal world over to the whims of others. This is emotional sovereignty. This is what it means to become resilient in the deepest psychological sense of the word. You do not become resilient by avoiding pain. You become resilient by walking straight into it with your eyes open and saying, "This will not break me." The emotional landscape of life is not meant to be sterile. You will be hurt. You will be disappointed. You will experience betrayal and loneliness and confusion. But what must die is the idea that every painful emotion requires an external reaction, that you must announce your distress, that you must convince someone else to carry your pain for you. That is an unproductive and immature strategy. Pain must be met with courage, not theater, because in the theater of reaction, you're always playing a role someone else wrote for you. It is far more courageous to feel the chaos and still choose your composure. To say, "I feel everything, but I will not be defined by what I feel in this moment." That is not suppression. It is hierarchy. It is the capacity to hold space for your suffering without being consumed by it. And when you begin to act from that place, something changes. The world sees it. The way people treat you changes. They sense your boundaries before you even speak them. And more importantly, you start to sense your own strength. Not as a fantasy, but as a living, breathing reality. You begin to trust yourself again. Now, emotional sensitivity is not a flaw. In fact, it is often a strength. But when it is left unregulated, it turns into emotional reactivity, and this is where the suffering compounds. Because now you're not just feeling something, you're reacting impulsively to it, and then reacting to your own reaction. You spiral. You say things you don't mean. You do things that betray your own values. And then you judge yourself for doing it. That's the trap. And it becomes a cycle of self-sabotage masked as authenticity. People say, "I'm just being real," but what they're being is unregulated. You must understand. Just because you feel something deeply does not mean it requires expression. Some emotions are sacred. They are meant to be observed, understood, and transformed, not thrown out into the world like broken glass. You can be sensitive. You can care. But you must remain in control of what you allow yourself to act upon. That is the difference between being emotionally rich and being emotionally reckless. When someone tries to provoke you, whether through subtle manipulation, criticism, or disrespect, the most powerful thing you can do is maintain your composure. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove something to yourself, that you are no longer easily moved. That you are anchored in something deeper than momentary ego gratification. That you are not here to perform emotional outbursts for those who thrive on chaos. This is what separates strength from spectacle. The process of becoming this person is not glamorous. It is difficult. You will fail. You will overreact, you will misstep, and you will hate yourself for it. But if you're paying attention, each misstep becomes a lesson. A calibration point, a step closer to a higher version of yourself. And with time, you will begin to notice the shift. You will speak less and say more. You will react less and mean more. You will realize that not everything requires your participation. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every emotion needs to be shared. And this, paradoxically, is where you become most powerful. Because your actions are now chosen. Not reactive, not performative, but deliberate, rooted. And when you begin to operate from that place, the world around you starts to change. Not because it has changed, but because your relationship to it has. The noise gets quieter. The triggers lose their edge. And you finally begin to inhabit your life from the inside out. The most dangerous pattern a person can fall into is believing that every disruption in their environment deserves attention. That every source of conflict, every demand for their emotional labor, is their responsibility to fix, to soothe, to correct. But that is a trap, one that leads not to growth or connection, but to chaos, resentment, and eventually to a form of self-erasure. When you constantly negotiate with chaos, you allow it to set the terms of your life. You become entangled in dysfunction not because you're weak, but because you haven't yet recognized that not every fire requires your water. You haven't yet understood that some battles are designed to consume you, not to refine you. This mistake is often born out of compassion, out of a well-intentioned desire to help, to mend, to rescue. But compassion without boundaries is self-destruction in disguise. If you're not discerning about where you invest your emotional energy, you will find yourself living in a constant state of inner volatility. You'll become hypervigilant, reactive, always anticipating the next conflict, the next crisis. And slowly, your identity becomes one of a manager of chaos rather than a creator of peace. That's not strength. That's survival. And no one is meant to live in a perpetual state of emotional survival. You have to learn to stop negotiating with that which only seeks to drain you. This applies to people, to thoughts, to habits. Not every emotion deserves negotiation. Not every insult deserves an answer. Not every problem is yours to solve. When someone disrespects you, and you find yourself trying to explain your worth to them, what you're actually doing is handing over your authority. You're placing your value into their hands, and asking them to validate it. But if your worth is conditional on being recognized, then it was never internalized in the first place. Real strength is the refusal to be dragged into drama. Real power is the ability to walk away, not out of avoidance, but out of clarity. A clarity that says, I know who I am. I don't need this to prove it. Some people thrive on conflict. It feeds something broken in them. And if you let yourself become entangled in their games, you will find yourself acting out of character just to defend yourself against narratives you didn't create. You'll exhaust yourself fighting perceptions that were never yours to begin with. This is why boundaries are not just polite, they are essential. They are the parameters that protect your peace, your sanity, your purpose. A life without boundaries is a life governed by the loudest voice in the room. And too often, the loudest voice is the one with the least wisdom. There is a dignity that arises when you choose not to respond to every provocation. A strength in silence. A power in poise. People confuse loudness with dominance, but true influence comes from presence, not volume. When you walk into a space and carry yourself with calm confidence, it disrupts more than any emotional outburst ever could. It forces people to confront their own noise. It creates contrast. And in that contrast, your calm becomes its own form of communication. There's a kind of magnetic force in someone who knows how to hold their ground without having to shout. They don't need to win arguments to feel validated. They don't seek control over others to feel safe. Instead, they control themselves. And that self-control radiates. It creates trust. It creates gravity. Others begin to respect not just what you say, but who you are being. And they adjust accordingly. This kind of presence doesn't come from pretending to be unaffected. It comes from deep inner work. From confronting your wounds so they no longer have to bleed onto others. From refusing to let your emotions be dictated by the instability of those around you. When you live without that internal discipline, you become like a tuning fork, vibrating to every external frequency, no matter how out of tune it is. But when you establish inner order, when you build a structure within yourself, you become the one who sets the tone. Your dignity is not about arrogance. It's about self-respect. It's about recognizing that your energy, your attention, your time, they are all finite and must be protected. You don't have to convince people of your worth. You don't have to perform your pain. You don't have to prove anything to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. That is a trap. And every moment you spend caught in it is a moment you've taken away from becoming who you were meant to be. The woman who holds her dignity in the face of chaos is not detached. She is disciplined. She has chosen not to be dragged down into the emotional trenches where nothing productive grows. She has chosen the higher road, not because it is easier, but because it is essential. And people will notice. They may not always say it, but they will feel it. They will feel the solidity of your presence, the certainty of your character, the grace in your restraint. To hold your dignity when others expect you to unravel is one of the most powerful acts of rebellion in a world that thrives on emotional spectacle. To stay grounded when others try to provoke you, to stay soft without being walked over, to remain calm while others lose control, that is the essence of true strength. And it's not a strength you inherit. It's a strength you build day by day, decision by decision, moment by moment. There is a moment small, almost imperceptible, between the stimulus and the response. That pause is where everything changes. That pause is where you either surrender to the old patterns that have enslaved you for years, or you take responsibility for your evolution. Most people never even see that moment. They live in reaction, in impulse, in reactivity so immediate that it feels automatic, like breathing. But the truth is, it's not automatic, it's conditioned. And it can be reconditioned. That split-second pause, when mastered, becomes the most powerful tool in your psychological arsenal. When someone offends you, when you're misunderstood, when life throws its cold hand across your face, your instinct may be to retaliate, to defend, to escalate. And the tragedy is that the retaliation never solves the original pain. It only compounds it. Now you're not just hurt, you're hurting others, and then punishing yourself for having done so. But when you pause, when you take that one breath, that one deliberate second, you reclaim the ability to choose. And choosing is everything. That is what separates you from being a puppet of your past to a person who authors her future. People underestimate how much power there is in restraint. But the ability to regulate your response is the root of maturity. It's the evidence of transformation. When you learn to master the pause, what you're really doing is establishing a hierarchy within your own psyche. You're choosing not to let your emotions sit on the throne. You're placing reason, clarity, and vision above the temporary satisfaction of reaction. And the longer you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You begin to watch your own mind with a kind of detached awareness. You feel the rage rise, the shame stir, the sorrow press against your ribs, and you say to yourself, wait. Not yet. Let me understand this before I act on it. That internal discipline, practiced over time, becomes character. And character is destiny. Now, there will be people who try to provoke you precisely because they can't provoke themselves into change. They thrive on the chaos they create in others because it distracts them from the chaos within. You have to see this clearly, without judgment, but with absolute honesty. If you don't pause, if you don't resist the bait, you end up playing a role in their script. You become a character in someone else's play, one designed not to empower you, but to exploit your emotional instability. But when you pause, you tear up the script. You step out of the performance. And in that stillness, you become something greater than reactive. You become responsible. Now let's talk about confidence. There's a pervasive illusion that confidence has something to do with being outspoken, bold, assertive in the loudest ways. But confidence, in its most genuine form, is not volume, it's certainty. And that certainty doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching. It's an inner conviction, born not from achievement or approval, but from alignment. Confidence is the result of self-respect multiplied by consistency. You don't need to shout to be heard when you carry that kind of certainty. You don't need to prove anything, because your very presence communicates what needs to be said. A confident woman does not seek attention. She commands it, not by demand, but by integrity. She is not obsessed with how she is perceived because she knows how she perceives herself is the foundation of her reality. She doesn't need to control others because she has mastered self-control. And self-control, contrary to popular belief, is not repression. It is power. It is the capacity to feel everything and still act from clarity. That is not coldness, it's order. That is not indifference, it's discipline. Confidence also means you no longer define yourself through external metrics. You don't measure your value by who accepts you, who praises you, who chooses you. You have already chosen yourself. You've done the work, faced the dark, stood in the silence where there was no applause, and you came back stronger. That's what real confidence is. It doesn't require witnesses. It doesn't require validation. It only requires alignment with truth. There is a serenity that arises when you live like this. A calm that no longer flinches at rejection, that no longer crumbles under scrutiny. You don't have to defend yourself constantly because you are not under attack, not from others, and more importantly, not from within. You've made peace with who you are. And when you've done that, no one can use your insecurities against you. Because you've already confronted them. You've already integrated them. You've already outgrown the need to be someone you're not just to make others feel more comfortable. And here's the paradox. The more grounded you are in this internal confidence, the more you are perceived as powerful. People will gravitate toward your presence not because you try to impress them, but because you radiate something rare, stability in a world that is always shaking. Certainty in a time of noise. Clarity where most are confused. This kind of confidence isn't just attractive, it's transformative. Because it invites others to rise too. It signals what's possible. And it challenges those around you to step into their own strength without apology. So confidence, real confidence, is not the absence of fear or doubt or insecurity. It is the refusal to let those things define how you show up in the world. It's a daily decision to honor your values, protect your peace, and embody the truth of who you are, even when no one's clapping. Especially then, because that's when the real transformation happens. There is a fundamental truth that must be confronted if you are ever to grow beyond the psychological traps that keep you stuck. Not all storms are yours to carry. It's astonishing how often people allow the emotional climate of others to determine the state of their own internal world. It's not done consciously, of course. It happens slowly, insidiously. Someone close to you spirals into chaos, rage, blame, bitterness, and instead of remaining grounded, you start matching their energy. You begin to reflect back to them the same instability they're radiating, not because you are unsteady by nature, but because you've been conditioned to take on responsibility for the moods, reactions, and failures of others. This is not compassion. This is enmeshment, and it's a subtle form of self-betrayal. You cannot allow someone else's storm to become your forecast. That's not wisdom, that's codependence. And the cost is staggering. It's not just the emotional fatigue, it's the erosion of identity. Over time, you lose track of where you end and where the chaos of others begins. You find yourself making decisions based on fear. Fear of upsetting someone, fear of being blamed, fear of conflict. And in doing so, you abandon your own values. You walk away from your own clarity just to survive someone else's dysfunction. This is where the resentment grows, quietly like mold. And it festers, not because you're weak, but because you haven't yet fully realized that love does not require self-sacrifice. Presence does not require participation. You can be aware of someone else's pain without being consumed by it. Emotional maturity requires that you build a boundary, not as a wall of rejection, but as a structure that protects your inner peace. You must know where your responsibility ends. You must recognize when someone is projecting their brokenness onto you, expecting you to clean up a mess they've made out of their own unresolved trauma. If you are not careful, you will become a mirror for their dysfunction. You will reflect their chaos back to them and believe it is your own. That is a tragedy, a slow erosion of self-respect disguised as empathy. It is not your job to regulate other people's emotions. It is your job to master your own. When you choose to stay calm in the face of instability, that is not passive. That is not denial. That is discipline. You are resisting the pull of emotional contagion. You are saying, I see your storm, but I will not abandon my ground to be pulled into it. That is an act of strength that most people will never understand, let alone practice. Because staying calm requires a kind of internal structure, one that can only be built through conscious suffering and persistent self-confrontation. It requires that you know yourself so deeply and respect yourself so completely that you will not negotiate your peace for anyone, not even those you love. And let me tell you something more. Stillness is not surrender. That lie has kept many people imprisoned in lives of unnecessary conflict. The idea that if you do not react, if you do not argue back, if you do not meet rage with rage, that you are somehow weak. No, you are wise. You are dangerous in the best way. Because when you can hold still in the middle of chaos, you are not avoiding the battle. You are choosing not to fight battles that are beneath you. You are selecting where your energy goes. You are preserving your strength for the moments that actually require it. Stillness is not giving up. It is standing so firmly in your truth that no storm can move you. Stillness is active. It is engagement without agitation. It is awareness without absorption. It is the deliberate refusal to allow the noise of the world to drown out the voice of your own conscience. This kind of stillness is built through pain, through facing the parts of yourself that are easily provoked, easily destabilized, easily manipulated. You must study those parts. You must understand them. And then you must master them. Because until you do, your calm is conditional. It lasts only until someone triggers the parts of you that remain unhealed. The goal is not to become indifferent. Indifference is numbness. It is disconnection. Stillness, on the other hand, is presence. It is full engagement with life, without being ruled by it. You feel everything. You see everything. And yet, you choose deliberately, carefully, purposefully. That is power. That is leadership. That is how you reclaim your life from the patterns that once controlled it. This level of presence transforms not just how you relate to others, but how you relate to yourself. You begin to trust yourself again. You stop questioning every emotional wave that comes through you, because you know it does not define you. You begin to walk with a different rhythm, slower but more certain. You begin to speak less but say more. You start choosing silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to prove anything. That is evolution. That is emotional sovereignty. And it is built, not found. So when the world rises up with its demands, its criticisms, its noise, pause. When someone tries to bait you into a drama that serves neither truth nor growth, pause. When your old patterns scream for attention, pause. That pause, that sacred moment of stillness, is where you reclaim your freedom. It is where you rise, not by force, not by performance, but by the quiet decision to remain grounded in who you are, no matter what tries to pull you away. You weren't born to carry the weight of everyone's chaos. You were born to live with depth, peace, and unapologetic authenticity. So the next time life pushes your buttons, remember, your silence can be louder than a scream. Your calm can be your greatest weapon. And your peace? That's your legacy. If this message spoke to something deep in your soul, let's talk about it in the comments below. I want to hear your story. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more content that speaks to the heart. And one more thing. What do you want to hear about next? Drop your topic suggestions down below, and let's keep this transformational conversation going. Speech Balloon Yellowheart.